Welcome to Crossover the Pond, brought to you by 21 Media Productions and Sports Social. He's Drew Lasker, I'm Josh Sexton, and this is another playoff special episode as we continue our NBA basketball journey, a short hezzy tween and stutter step away here in the UK. Drew, playoffs are heating up right now. We made some not bold predictions, I wouldn't say, but some predictions about these series on the last pod. I went back to listen to it this morning as I was doing my prep for the episode, and there's been some surprises in here. It's been good to see some really high level basketball from all sides and both sides of the conferences.
Yeah, round one has been fantastic. You got 5 games that ended up 1-1, and that's the most that we've had since 2014. And it's been a journey. Like, it's been almost a week and a half, and we're still rolling on. The biggest takeaway, and I've been thinking about you every day as these playoffs go on, is don't overreact. I came on here last episode overreacting to game one, but we know that is NBA playoffs 101, is that you can't overreact on game one. And now we have some serious series underway now.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the predictions I was laughing at from myself the most was how much I overreacted personally to the New York Knicks in Game One. But we'll come on to talk about them towards the back end of the show. We're going to do the Western Conference first, and we'll talk about the team who've got through first, Drew, because the OKC Thunder getting it done in a way that we probably expected them to in this first round series with Phoenix, really. And no disrespect to Phoenix, I know if any of the Phoenix Suns players were listening to this podcast, they wouldn't want to hear this necessarily, and I'm sure they won't be looking at it like this, but they gave a really good account of themselves, and without sounding patronising about it, they won just by getting to the playoffs this season because they were not a team that was expected to be in this position, even having to do it through the play-in and having lost the first game of the play-in to Portland. The fact that they were here, the amount of injuries they had this season, for me, they just kind of limped over the line in the end. I think that's why they lost the game to Portland in the play-in. It's why they weren't able to give OKC a little bit more of a series in this one. Just didn't quite have that star power, and Booker didn't look like he could go toe to toe with Shea, which there's absolutely no shame in saying, because I imagine the MVP is shortly about to come out, Drew, and I'm not sure anybody in the league is going to go toe to toe with Shea necessarily when that award comes out.
Yeah, I think it's a foregone conclusion. Um, a lot of people forgot about the body of work that Shea put in at the beginning of the season, hence why they were putting Wemby, Joker in the conversation. And although Joker had an incredible offensive year, Shea was just consistent throughout the season. We talked about it, those consecutive 20-point games. That's just incredible when you really break it down. But they just had too much for Phoenix, and it comes down to those 3 things I talk about: youth, depth, length. OKC got it all. You lose a all NBA player in Jalen Williams, and they just keep it moving. Shea, he just always finds a way to gobble up 30 points. And with Phoenix, they just did not have enough. You got 4 guys last night that scored over 20 points, and that's still not enough. The takeaway for Phoenix is they're in a good spot for the future. They got their head coach in Ott, who has been phenomenal. They have their culture. What Dylan Brooks is set. Now they can focus on building around this core. Jalen Green has changed the narrative, although he was 1 for 10 from downtown last night. But we know the reason why he's in Phoenix, because he averaged 8 points a game in that playoff series with the Rockets last year. So, he had a solid playoffs. He was able to change the narrative. And so hopefully these guys can go in the offseason a little bit hungry for more. And then the front office can do some more work behind the scenes, bringing in more talent. When you look at their roster, I guarantee you that the average fan have never heard of most of these guys. Grayson O'Neal, Allen is probably the only player, but guys like Rasheer Fleming, Royce O'Neal, Amir Coffey, Ryan Dunn. I guarantee you, casual fans haven't heard a lot of these guys. And in the end, they're right where they belong. They got a place to the NBA playoffs, which is always great going into the offseason, but OKC just had way too much.
Yeah, and again, when you talk about a lack of household names, it'll be one of the things that sort of flies under the radar. But being without Jordan Goodwin and Mark Williams in this one, listen, the OKC Thunder without Jalen Williams as they kind of go through, but OKC have enough depth to handle even an injury to a starting five guy. The Phoenix Suns don't have that depth where you can take two starting five guys out of that team. Also, Iguodala gave a really good account of himself stepping into that starting center spot. You've mentioned Jalen Green there having a pretty impressive playoffs. Colin Gillespie is someone who I've been so impressed by all year, but you come up against this OKC juggernaut, and this is kind of what's going to happen. And you get a huge series from Shea, a third consecutive first round sweep. For me, the cheat code with OKC is always going to be, the key word for me there that you say, Drew, is depth. Where Shea is basically always going to score at least 30 points a night, but then you've got three other guys at least who can get you in double digits. Usually one of them is coming off the bench. We've seen that when it was AJ Mitchell in this series. We've seen it when AJ Mitchell went into the starting lineup and it was Alex Caruso. The talent in this team, we're going to come on to talk about the Lakers and the Rockets, but if I'm the Lakers and the Rockets, this first round I'm just going to soak up, because there's a very good chance that second round doesn't last very long either.
Yeah, whatever one of those teams make it through, basically with OKC, their challenge is going to come in the conference finals.
Yeah.
And with Phoenix, their opportunity was in game three, where they had that slight lead there. And it wasn't until OKC finished off with the 18-0 run, I believe, in the first or second quarter. And that was their series done. So OKC, they get a chance to kick their feet up for a while, rest up the legs. And that probably works in the hands of the Rockets or the Lakers in the next round, because the more that OKC plays, the more rhythm that they're able to gain, right? And so, with all these guys, with all this depth, you need game time to unleash these guys. And so, the only thing that could hurt OKC is too much rest. And so we'll see. They'll be keeping their eyes on this matchup, this 4-5 matchup with the Rockets and the Lakers.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we'll save that one for now, just because I think there's going to be a lot of narratives that can continue to come out of that one. I want to talk about Denver and Minnesota first and foremost, because me and you kind of called that this would be an interesting series. I know that you'd back the Timberwolves a little bit more, and I'd back Denver a little bit more. And the Timberwolves have been dealing with some health stuff, but this series has been an absolute barnstormer. I've loved seeing Jaden McDaniels coming out and fueling the fire of hatred between these two. It continued in the game last night too, even though Denver managed to get one back on Minnesota. There was a little point in the fourth quarter, I think it was, where Jaden McDaniels had Nikola Jokic locked up around the neck and things like that. It's just been great to watch, and Minnesota were looking good for what would have been a relative upset in this 3-6 matchup, but DiVincenzo goes down for the season. Ant's down, and there's no sort of indication yet as to when he's going to be back. The Minnesota Timberwolves have listed him as week to week, and suddenly, Drew, that momentum is stunted. And I mentioned before about having depth. I feel a little bit sorry for the Timberwolves in this one, because I think the Timberwolves do have relative depth, but I think if you'd have said to them when they reacquired Mike Conley that if he was going to be a really important player for them in the playoffs, they'd have been saying, no, that's not the whole point of this, and you'd be there from the future going, no, I promise you, Mike Conley is going to be playing big minutes in the playoffs, and that would have shocked them completely.
Yeah, you wouldn't have foresaw this at the trade deadline when he was moved, right? That, hey, if we had a crystal ball and say, hey, Mike Conley, you're going to be back with the Timberwolves and you're going to be starting in a playoff game, no one would have saw that coming. But this series is definitely lived up to the hype, and it's just the storylines around it. Obviously, with DiVincenzo getting injured, and then Ant-Man, and you talk about Minnesota's depth that they were able to acquire at the trade deadline. It was specifically to support, that starting lineup. And now those guys are now entered into the starting lineup. DeSumo was brought in at the deadline, Kyle Anderson. And so you really like the way this team was shaped up. But now the series has been turned on its head. Um, I got a feeling that it's definitely going to go 7 for sure. And I'm going to say if it goes 7, Denver's going to win it. Minnesota must take care of business in game 6. And they got to be encouraged from last night, because you're on the road. You shoot 43% from the 3-point line. You shoot 50% from the field. So you know that you can score. When you really break down the numbers, it's the 25 turnovers. If you just kind of clean that up, you can't survive 25 turnovers on the road. So basically, 25 attempts that you didn't acquire, and you lost the game by how many points? You lost the game by 12. So that's got to be encouraging. On the other side, Denver as well. They're still not at full strip. Peyton Watson, I don't know if we see him this season. Um, Aaron Gordon as well with that calf. I seriously doubt they're going to be testing that. So there's no excuses on either side, even though Minnesota's lost their superstar. But I will say this, that Minnesota has to take care of business on game six, because if this goes game seven, it's set up for Denver.
Absolutely, and you mentioned about Ant-Man going down. Obviously, he's the lead ball handler for Minnesota. I just think it's going to ultimately come down to who can be the real adult in this. I think one of the things that's maybe misconstrued about Ant, because he's got this really like young persona, and is in these interviews with Barack Obama, telling Barack Obama he's the truth and stuff, is how much of an actual adult he is on the court, how much he just gets it done. There's no excuses. There's sometimes high turnover games, but he's a very high usage guy. Julius Randle is someone who I think when he becomes the first option has kind of shown time and time again that he's not necessarily prepared to be the adult in these things. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But you mentioned the Aaron Gordon injury and how he was one of the biggest X factors coming into this series. And actually, what gets it done for Denver last night is that Spencer Jones comes into the starting five, plays that Aaron Gordon role, and he's been good all series. Spencer Jones, really, for a guy who makes less on the season than Nikola Jokic is making in one game. He's been great defensively all season, but he steps up with 20 points last night as well. Me and you have spoke about him on the pod earlier in the season, Spencer Jones, as someone who'd been an X factor for the Denver Nuggets, and it kind of always happens in playoff series that go long as you get somebody. I mentioned that Bones Highland could maybe be one for Minnesota as the series went on. You've got some decent little scoring games in there from Bones, but Spencer Jones gave you some real adult basketball for Denver last night, and I think it came at the perfect time, because even though you say that you think Denver will get it done if it goes to 7, the teams that come from 3-1 down sort of very rarely get it done unless you've got all those adults on the court. And yeah, I think this could hinge on whether Denver do manage to get Aaron Gordon back out there, whether they do manage to get Peyton Watson back out there, because as Jaden McDaniels said, there's a lot of bad defenders on that Denver team, and those Minnesota guys will only go hunting them if they don't have their best ones there.
Emotional maturity, which one of these teams will be able to contain their emotion, is what it's going to boil down to. And you mentioned his name, and I'm going to repeat it. I am zeroed in on Julius Randle, a guy who wanted to be a franchise guy. Credit to him. He's taken a back seat to Ant, not initially, but, you could tell that he is granted kinged Ant Edwards since settling in with Minnesota, and recognize that this is definitely his team. Throughout the course of the season, if you follow Minnesota, there are games that you look at Randall, you're like, what the hell are you doing? Settle in for the threes. But now it's your time. This is your opportunity to prove that why you're the, $150 million man. So I'm zeroed in on him. But here's a question for you. Is focusing on Denver, right? I've seen a lot of comments in regards to Christian Bond and does he deserve that $125 million contract? Is Spencer Jones more valuable than Christian Bond to you? Braun, excuse me.
I, I think it's tricky, because I think that what we're probably ignoring is that Christian Braun's got like a bit more of a body of work for Denver. I think Denver have really struggled with roster construction over the past like year or two, where they've brought back a guy like Bruce Brown, who's not necessarily been able to hit the heights that they'd have hoped that he would coming into this season. Christian Braun has had his injury issues over the course of the season too, and never really feels like he's settled back into that. I don't think those two guys especially are ever going to necessarily like lead you in offense, which is why I think they brought in a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr. to bring that kind of offense. And then yet you've got a guy like Spencer Jones who you kind of like almost have to rely on to an extent for both the defense and the offense. And that's where I'd maybe look at a guy like Christian Braun and be like, we need more from you, like on both sides of the ball, really. Like, it can't just be that he's only getting it done on the defensive side of the ball. Yes, you've got the 2 stars at the top of this, but most teams around the league now have got 2 stars. For much as we talk about Julius Randle and maybe his lack of emotional maturity there, when him and Ant on the court together, there's no real questions about that, because it doesn't need to be, because Ant can kind of like guide Julius through a game almost, and they can be 2 stars really working in tandem there. But you need those sort of third and fourth option guys behind that. And if Christian Braun can't get that done, then I understand why there are question marks about him. But I would say that sometimes we can focus a lot on the offensive game and not so much on the defensive game. And I think Christian Braun does tend to bring it a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball, and especially this season when it's been lacking a little bit from a guy like Bruce Brown.
Yeah, well said. Well, game six on Thursday night, and that will be all eyes locked in on that one. So let's see how that one unfolds.
Absolutely, and we'll move on to a series that you got the chance to cover for Amazon Prime on Friday. I think it was, Drew. I always get the timings wrong because obviously the time difference for us here. What day is it actually when the game tips off? But Spurs looking like they are now ready to close out Portland. They did look shell shocked in that game three after Wemby went. Game two, sorry, after Wemby went down, but they got it done without him in game three, and are surely now huge favourites to close it out in Portland. I wish we'd done some bold predictions, to be honest, Drew, because and I've got WhatsApp receipts of this, by the way. I predicted this with a friend as we were sort of WhatsApping back and forth about all the different series. I said like Wemby went down, and that's people will be thinking that Portland have maybe got a chance in this series, but they'll get it done in game three in Portland without him. They'll go in game three, game three in Portland without him. They'll go into game four with him back, and then game five back to San Antonio. For as good as Portland have been throughout this season and throughout this series, I'm looking at San Antonio to get this one wrapped up now, going back to Texas.
Yeah, Portland had their opportunity. They walk out of this series with the respect from the NBA community because they battled. This series could easily be 2-2. If you focus in on game 3 specifically, Portland just really controlling that game. And this was the game without Wemby. And this is when Dylan Harper had his coming out party. San Antonio looked lost, searching for answers. Fox, none all those guys had no shows, but then it was the rookie that came out and saved the day. And then you focus in on game 4 as well. Portland again with a nice healthy lead. And the narrative of this series, if you could describe it in one word, is going to be described as meltdowns. Portland just have meltdowns late, and San Antonio's just been able to take over. In that second half, Wemby was incredible. I mean, just everywhere, just causing havoc in the paint. And the issue with Portland, an area that they're going to have to address is their shooting. They're a couple of snipers away from being part of the conversation, and Dame Lillard obviously helps with that when he comes back next year. But these young guys could play, man. Drew Holiday has just been quietly good. Avila hasn't had a great series scoring. He's going to have to get in the lab and work on his pull-up jump shot and his three ball this summer. We know how he can get to the rim, but in the playoffs, those lanes cut off a little bit quicker. The scouting report is a little bit more locked in, so he's not able to slither and get his way in the paint as consistently as he did in the season, and it just does not shoot it well enough from outside. So that's an area that I'll see him working on this offseason. And then Scoot Henderson, after having that incredible game 2, 30 plus points, just putting the world on notice. The turning point in this series is when Scoot started talking to Dylan Harper. They were going back and forth in game 3. And if you're Scoot Henderson, you can't follow that up with a goose egg. You cannot score 0 points, 0 for 7, 0 for 3 from the line. You're the number 2 pick. Like, you got to find a way to put the ball in the basket, even if the shooting percentages is low. So he just proved that he's not that guy. And, Scoot Henderson at one point of a time, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, is that there were real debate out there whether he should be the number 1 pick over Wemby. Remember that? Like, how embarrassing is that conversation now? Like, that was a real conversation. Well, we can put that to bed now. It's not even close.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people that completely wrote off Scoot Henderson. And he was starting to, at least get a little bit more credit in the bank over the course of this series. But like you say, we go back to that point of emotional maturity before we talk about a guy like Julius Randle, who's never necessarily been able to really hone in on that on his career. And I think that's so important for guys coming into the NBA and, for my mind, or my money at least. I'm not sure Scoot Henderson is that guy who can be that sort of, person to steady the ship. I imagine when Damian Lillard comes back next season, that backcourt is the old head backcourt of two guys who are steady, who can get it done. I don't think that roster is that far away, really. I think they're probably a Jeremy Grant trade away. Like it's definitely time to get off that contract now if they can find somebody who will take that awful contract of Jeremy Grant's on.
Good
But
luck.
yeah, I know, honestly. But I think if they can find a way to get off that money, then they're probably only a couple of little moves away. We liked the Vic Krejci move earlier in the summer, and he's not getting any PT. And a guy like Jeremy Grant is to give you 1 from 3 from 3. So I think there's definitely a few more sort of subtle tweaks they can do, and they will be back, I'm sure. But it might have helped the Spurs team, to be honest, Drew, moving on to the next round and potentially to that conference finals with OKC, who will already be sitting and waiting and watching this side of the bracket to get a bit of a bloody nose in this round to give them a welcome to the playoffs moment because, not dissimilar to the Detroit Pistons, who we're going to come on to for vastly different reasons. This Spurs team, one of the questions we had coming into it was that they were young, are those lights going to be too bright for them? And they have had one game where we've definitely been left questioning that, but besides that, it's only just been that bloody nose, been able to wipe that blood away and continue on. And maybe there'll be some bigger challenges to come. I'm sure there will be some bigger challenges to come in this playoffs, but for now, at least the Spurs have proven they can get it done.
Yeah, and when you look at both of these teams so far, OKC and now San Antonio, what do they have in common? Those three categories that I've been talking about all season: youth, depth, length. Specifically with San Antonio, I'm looking at their roster now. Depth. I mean, Wemby. If Wemby doesn't have a big scoring night, well, you got Fox, you got Castle. We've already seen Harper. Even Keldon Johnson can muster it up. So many guys for Portland. If Avida doesn't score, who else is going to score for you? So you see the common denominator between all four teams that we've talked about so far.
Absolutely. Well, it's time, Drew, for us to move on to the Los Angeles Lakers and your Houston Rockets. And I've got to be honest, Drew. I've been so disappointed, embarrassed by Houston over the course of this playoff series so far. I think they've been absolutely horrible this series. I've been to that same friend that I was texting about the San Antonio Spurs before. I've been saying like how much I just don't enjoy Ime Udoka's manner as a coach. Really, they did manage to steal a game back with a 5 double-digit masterclass from all of their starting five. But I'm sort of looking at that and thinking it was just a flash in the pan. Like even if they get Durant back now, I don't really see a way in which they find their way back into this series. I think the Lakers have done enough to get themselves through this first round. Whether they get Luka and Reeves back, I know Reeves was put down as questionable and then downgraded again to out for this game 4. So maybe he is close. Luka, if he's close in terms of the second round, then maybe there's a chance that we see them against OKC. I still don't think that'll be a long series in the second round, but for me, I'm prepared to shovel dirt on this Houston team, right back to the drawing board for them, possibly in terms of a coach. I think you need someone who's a bit more tactically flexible, someone who is a little bit more of like a player's coach. Like I don't like the way Udoka likes constantly calling out guys in the media, and I know like there's probably a time in which that kind of coach could exist in the NBA. I'm not sure now with the amount like we try and empower our star players and empower guys in general, that constantly like throwing them under the bus in the media is a way home for any coach really. And I think it's no surprise to me that a lot of the old head coaches are out of the NBA now, and we're seeing a real resurgence of a younger coach. And I know Ime Udoka falls into the category of being a younger coach, but he's got this old head style that I'm not sure is washing with me completely. I don't know about you as a Houston fan.
Yeah, you brought up a good point. Um, it's a different way. It's a different time, right? Like coaching hard, you got to be careful with that. The only guys that can get away with that are the guys like Pop that's been established for a very long time. But just this new generation of players, they don't respond well to that type of coaching. And it's just different. You have to adapt as a coach. It's one thing about keeping guys accountable, and it's another thing about calling them out consistently. You say you're embarrassed about Houston. If you've been listening to this podcast this year, you shouldn't be surprised because we've seen it coming. We've been concerned about Houston all season long. These debacles down the stretch, we've seen it consistently. We talked about not having a point guard. Fran VanVleet pretty much demoralized this team's chance of really competing for a title. And unfortunately, in game three, their youth just showed their ugly head. That play by Reed Shepard, what are you doing? Trying to out dribble a double team in the back court when you up. And then the foul, Marcus Smart. But then you got to give credit to LeBron James. I mean, just incredible to be able to hit that shot and then still have the energy to get it done in overtime. But what's very glaring is that uh, Bronny James has single-handedly outplayed the Rockets bench. Who saw that coming? Shout out to him, right? Because it's not easy to be able to um, continue to show your face out of all the criticism that he's gotten. They've said it was nepotism. They said he didn't belong. Even not even having the respect of the players in the league. You got coaches calling him out. And somehow this kid just puts his head down and goes to work, and he's shining in the very bright moment. But, game four, I put nothing on it. It was so predictable. Usually when you come after an emotional win on the road like the Lakers did in game three, the Rockets had better been the most desperate team. I would have been shocked if they weren't. So I expected them to win game four. I expect Lakers to take care of business at home in game five. And uh, they just need to put the Rockets out of their misery because this team isn't going anywhere. It's very unfortunate about the topic of conversation surrounding Kevin Durant. All of a sudden, there's a lot of negativity coming his way. He's hurt. I mean, you think he's going to play 78 games during the season and all of a sudden get to the playoffs and say, I don't want to play? Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, he's obviously hurt. There's a difference between being hurt and being injured. He's not hurt, he's injured. Because if you were hurt, you strap it up and play. But obviously, he's 37 years old. He can't go. And that's just the bottom line. So for people to have all these other narratives about not great leadership and all these other things, like, yeah, I'm just not buying it. Like Kevin Durant has been good for this team this year. Maybe not for all the reasons that people want it to be, but he has provided what the team needed, and that was an upgrade over Jalen Green. That was a get out of jail card. That was a bucket getter. They just don't have a table setter in the playoffs. The thing about the playoffs that everyone has to understand is that your flaws get magnified. So, when you're in the club, the lights is on. We get to see what you really look like. So you can't hide. So that's what the playoffs are. So if you struggle in an area, teams are going to exploit that. And the Rockets is just being exploited.
And again, the word I think we're going to keep coming back to throughout this, Drew, emotional maturity. There was one name that you didn't mention in that sort of debacle of plays there, really, that Houston committed to let the Lakers take that back to OT and then take that game three ultimately. That Jabari Smith Jr. pass in the backcourt where he's like for no reason tried to throw it over Marcus Smart, and that's where the Marcus Smart foul comes in. It's a lack of emotional maturity, and maybe the one guy on this roster that does have a little bit of that, although if you looked at his Twitter, you'd maybe think differently, is Kevin Durant. But you mentioned it, 37 years old, the second most minutes played in the league this season behind Amen Thompson. I'm getting Tom Thibodeau vibes from Ime Udoka, which when you're Ime Udoka and you're like a 40-year-old coach, something, I shouldn't be getting Tom Thibodeau vibes from you. You shouldn't be running these guys into the ground. Spread that out more, spread the love more over the course of the regular season, and maybe you'd have the emotional stability of Kevin Durant to call on at this stage, so you wouldn't have to be having to look to guys like Jabari Smith Jr. and Reece Shepard to try and be adults in this team, because these guys are not adults yet. They shrink under these bright lights. And one guy who hasn't, and you mentioned it there, time and time again for me, someone who I know you're a huge Michael Jordan head, Drew, but I just think LeBron James has cemented his legacy as the greatest of all time for me in this series, because one of the things that Michael was so great at was so many different facets of the game, but it was that sort of like almost Michael fade away into the shadows, go and play baseball for a little bit and come back and still win 2 or 3 championships, go away and then come back and play again for the Wizards. But the one thing LeBron James has had over him, he's had over Kobe Bryant, he's had over Hakeem Olajuwon, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you name it, LeBron James is still doing it in the playoffs after 23 years in the league. This is like nothing we've ever seen before. It's emotional maturity on another level. And you know what? It's transferred to his kid. For all the questions we had about Bronny James in terms of ability, in terms of all these different things you've mentioned there, Drew, that you can throw at Bronny James, emotional stability is the one thing he had, and he proves it when he knocks down threes in big moments. When, as you say, he plays better than any of the Houston benches has done in this series. And the Lakers have not got necessarily the greatest depth, I don't think, in terms of that talent and in terms of that ability. But if you've got guys who can come in and be ready for the moment, like Bronny James has been, that to me is better than anything that Houston have got, because Houston have got guys in their starting five that weren't ready for this moment.
The funniest thing I've seen on Twitter was LeBron James created a human being so he could help him in the playoffs. I mean, we'll save this topic for another podcast, but I'm not gonna lie. Watching LeBron James's playoff series, he's getting closer and closer and closer to my GOAT, Michael Jordan, and pushing him off the pedestal. And I will say this: if LeBron James is able to somehow beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, I will buy a Los Angeles number 23 jersey, come here on the podcast, and confess that he is the greatest that we have ever seen.
Oh God, I really hope I'm clipping this up at some point in the future, and then we can do the little like Curb Your Enthusiasm cut to you sat in the 23 jersey. I listen, I'm a Lakers hater, but I love me some LeBron James, and I love everything
Gotta
that he's
respect
provided
it,
in this
man.
playoffs. Absolutely got to give LeBron James his flowers for everything, not just what has come this season, what may even be to come in the future, which is just ridiculous when you're talking about a man who's 41 years old still doing it like that. But we'll flip over to the Eastern Conference, Drew, and we've got Orlando. We've got an 8th seed on the brink of an upset after those games last night. A close series being edged by Orlando winning the possession battle, and I'm a little bit worried that the concerns that we had again all season for Detroit are coming to fruition now. I was looking at like the sort of overall totals before, and I think it's like 308, 304 over the course of this, but Orlando have just shot a few more shots than Detroit have. They've just made a few more threes than Detroit have, and Orlando I don't think are like by any stretch of the imagination a good 3-point shooting team or a really free flowing offense, but they've been able to be really physical with Cade. They've been able to be really physical with Jalen Duren, who's been like basically a non-factor on the offensive end in this series. And that to me is going to be where they edge this, because, even if we see Denver maybe coming back from that 3-1 deficit in the Minnesota matchup because of the injuries that Minnesota have, even with Franz Wagner going down in this one, I don't really see Orlando letting go of this rope, because I don't think Detroit, again, the word we're going to keep coming back to, the phrase going to keep coming back to, emotional maturity. I'm not sure Detroit were ready for this moment, and they've been exposed by a really physical team who, it turns out, were way more ready for this moment than any of us ever anticipated.
Yeah, it's just a bad matchup for Detroit, unfortunately. Out of all the teams that they were able to beat up on the regular season, just out muscle, but the Orlando Magic is the only team in the East, one of the few that can look the bully right in the eye and take their lunch money back. And that's basically what Orlando Magic is doing. And also, what's fascinating is that you can see how the game is changing. We've talked about this as well, about what's required in this new NBA. 20 years ago, Detroit gets through this series. You know why? Because you could win with a superstar and a bunch of background singers. Not anymore. And you see what they're doing to Cade. They're throwing multiple bodies at him, forcing the ball out of his hands and saying, I dare you. I dare you. I dare you to the other guys to be able to make shots outside. And they just have not had the ability. Detroit, down the stretch was still trying to find their rotation and still trying to search and find guys who can knock down the three ball. And they just have not been able to find that reliable guy. So they're taking the ball out of Cade's hands. On the other side, Orlando got multiple guys who can muster it up. You got Desmond Bain, who we know could be the best player. Paulo, who can be the best player in stretch. And now you got Franz Wagner back in the lineup. Again, you're just starting to see this consistent story in the playoffs. The teams that have multiple guys can get it done. In Detroit, they just don't have enough. Been really disappointed with Duren. And this is going to be an awful, awful look for Detroit. Although, speaking to them when we had them on the podcast, they said that they wouldn't put a lot of, it wasn't a must win season for them, but it was at least a must get out the first round. At least you can't win 60 games and not make it out of the first round. So Tough series. It's not over with yet. They go home on Wednesday night. I'll be covering that game. So we'll see how it unfolds.
Yeah, and I mentioned the Franz Wagner injury there, which will be a huge blow for Orlando going into that one. I still expect that Detroit does steal that one back. To be honest, going into Game 5, but I see Orlando getting it done back in Orlando. Whether Franz Wagner can get back on the court or not is sort of another matter, and it almost becomes a matter for the second round, really. Which I don't want to quite move on to Cleveland and Toronto yet. But another thing me and you've been saying, Drew, over the course of this season is that 3-point shooting alone doesn't get you there now. Like guys are managing to do more inside. The mid range has really come back as a sort of almost a high percentage shot, even though it's traditionally not. And you'll get trainers telling you that it's not, coaches telling you that the mid range shot is not a high percentage shot. We're seeing a lot of teams being killers in the mid range this season, and you've got two teams there who could potentially get into the second round of the playoffs that are not good shooting teams in Toronto and in the Orlando Magic. And I saw a really funny tweet before, just like, I need that Toronto and Orlando Magic matchup in the second round because we need to see basketball get set back by 20 years.
Yeah, and if you're asking, why, it's because the mid range is more reliable. It's more of a consistent shot. So even if you're missing, the rebounds are going to typically fall underneath in the paint, whereas three balls, if you miss them, they lead to fast break points to the other side because they're long rebounds. So it's a lot of factors. And, with the three ball, you live and you die by it, right? And whereas with mid range, even if you're missing, you're going to make that shot more consistently just because it's closer. But then also, you have an opportunity to get your defense set on the other side when you miss. So that's the difference in between the shot. You're just able to have a more consistent performance, especially over the course of a 7 game series playoffs. Whereas, like, if you're relying solely on a 3-point shot, you're going to be up and down like a yo yo.
Absolutely, and you mentioned about living and dying by the three. Perfect segue to take me on to Cleveland and Toronto, because Cleveland has let go of the rope in this series, really, by not shooting the ball well, and you felt that was their big advantage over Toronto going into this. But Toronto have just been able to expose Cleveland, and again, that phrase I'm going to keep coming back to, emotional maturity. One of the ways they've been able to expose them is by exposing Evan Mobley, who was the defensive player of the year last season, and yet they've had to swap him out for Dean Wade in terms of that assignment of Scotty Barnes, because every single time in these past 2 games, especially, Scotty Barnes just been going through Evan Mobley's chest, questioning whether he is ready for this moment. And that might be Cleveland's biggest question mark now going into the offseason, especially if they fall short again. And heaven forbid they fall short in this, because everyone was saying coming into this series or coming into these playoffs, this was win or die for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They made that trade to get 10 years older, swapping James Harden in for Darius Garland. And if they do fall short again, Drew, then I'm looking at Evan Mobley as being on the chopping block, especially when Giannis Antetokounmpo and guys like that are waiting in the wings. That to me looks like almost a perfect swap for both teams, really. Maybe not even necessarily if you're the Bucks, because there's been big question marks about Evan Mobley and whether he's ready for these moments. And so far in this series, not singing him out, because as I mentioned, Cleveland have not shot the ball well, but he's not been ready for this moment, and Cleveland have died by the three in these last 2 games.
Yeah, the one thing about the playoffs, again, it exposes you, and it also allows you to see what contracts are worthy. For Evan Mobley, it's going to be hard to get off that contract. He's going to make 60 million in 2029. So good luck getting off the books for that, unless you find a young team that's desperate and needing to plug a hole inside. But all you got to do is look at the plus minuses from that game, which, by the way, it was an ugly game. It was a lot of missed shots. Cleveland 10 for 40 from downtown, and Toronto 4 for 30. Just disgusting. What's concerning for Cleveland, though, is that Brandon Ingram has had a terrible series and they're still locked in. You got to think sooner or later he's going to be able to find his rhythm. But Mobley was a minus 13. And when you look at the starters, Dean Wade, a plus 11. Jared Allen, a plus 14. Even James Harden, a plus 1. Donovan Mitchell, a minus 8. But nevertheless, you're the only starter with a double-digit plus minus. And so that just goes to show of what type of impact he's had this playoffs. And yeah, this was supposed, and this is why Cleveland struggled this year. They were up and down all year, and people were saying, why weren't they able to build off that number one seed they had last year? A lot of that was because Evan Mobley, he just has not been able to take that next step forward. Shot poorly from the free throw line this season, inconsistent from the three, but it's not just about that. It's just he's not been able to be a dominant force. And that is the bottom line. And for Toronto, they're playing with house money now. They go into Cleveland with nothing to lose. The pressure is back on Cleveland. But this series is, in my eyes, is very predictable. This is a home court series. I see it going 7, and I see Cleveland taking care of business in 7.
Yeah, I think I agree. And Kenny Atkinson has come out and sort of been very, almost level about that. He said, like, this is the playoffs. You should expect that every series goes to 7, that home court teams generally see it out. And I think that's kind of, him slightly letting us in for his own prediction there, that he thinks this will just be a home court series. Because we saw Toronto, I should say, really ramp up the pressure defensively on their home court. But like you, Drew, I have doubts going back to Cleveland whether they can maintain that edge going forward, because there's nothing special about this Toronto team offensively. They have been able to get Scotty Barnes going in this series. And, even if they do go out in this first round, Scotty Barnes goes out with a huge amount of credit for the season he's had and how much he's followed that up in the playoffs as well. Brandon Ingram, the minute that they swapped that defensive assignment with Dean Wade and Evan Mobley, Brandon Ingram was able to get his own in this game too. RJ Barrett and, guys like Corin Mully Boyles and Jamal Shed have been able to have big moments throughout these playoffs too. So if I'm Toronto, I'm again, similar to sort of Phoenix almost. I'm like, listen, we're just arriving at the party. We're just trying to, take our shoes off and start to, boogie on the dance floor. We're not necessarily ready for going to the punch bowl and taking somebody home for the evening yet. I just think Toronto have got more time on their side. And yeah, I'm with you, Joe. I don't see this series going their way. But this has been a playoffs of surprises so far, so who knows? Who knows?
And you know who's the biggest winner of this all? It has to be the Orlando Magic, because all of a sudden they can find themselves in the conference finals, because none of these teams scare you. Cleveland doesn't scare you. And definitely Toronto doesn't. So Orlando Magic, if they're able to take care of business and take care of this series, man, they could be in the position that a lot of teams kind of predicted them to be in the beginning of the year anyway.
Absolutely. I don't know about you, Drew. I don't know if it's the Dante Marcatelli effect from when he came on the podcast earlier in the season and sort of won both of our hearts, really. But around the house, every job I've been doing for like the last week, I've just been doing the Orlando Magic, Orlando Magic.
And Dante, I've been checking out his socials. He's just having that big smile on his face. So shout out to him.
Absolutely, shout out to him. I'm glad to see that he's been able to enjoy this little Cinderella story almost from the Orlando Magic, where Jamal Mosley was on the hot seat, and now I'm looking at it and thinking like, is we're going to see a Jamal Cain Finals MVP? Which way is this going to go for the Orlando Magic? But we'll move on to another series here, Drew. The Knicks, the other side of the bracket against the Atlanta Hawks, and you said that you felt like Atlanta would cause New York some problems in this series. I was predicting that it would go to probably 6 and that New York would be able to get it done, but you said that you could see this going to 7. They've been able to do just that, and I have to say, like, when we talk about Jaden McDaniels sort of fueling narratives before, if you'd have said to me, Drew, that the guy who'd come out of this series as the supervillain, the one that the crowd would be booing every time he touches the floor, is CJ McCollum, of all guys. CJ McCollum's like the nicest guy in the NBA, and yet he's come out, he's embraced the supervillain role. And I actually, slipped up a little bit earlier in the season when we were covering the Atlanta Hawks and their trades, because I kind of made out like trading for CJ McCollum was almost just them, like, getting off assets of Trae Young and stuff like that. But CJ McCollum has absolutely turned up to this party. He's shown that he's ready to be a veteran to lead these young guys. And when you've not necessarily seen, again, the word I come back to, emotional maturity from guys like Jalen Johnson or Jonathan Kuminga on a consistent basis in this season, the guy who has stayed consistent throughout it is CJ McCollum. And it's these vets, no matter where your youth is, no matter where your depth is, no matter where your energy, athleticism, all these things are, you have to have vets on the floor in the playoffs to be consistent, and CJ McCollum has been that.
And life comes at you fast, because in January, CJ McCollum was nowhere near on the playoff invite list, and now all of a sudden he's on
We
a
were
dance
saying
floor.
free CJ, free
Go
CJ.
CJ, go CJ, go CJ. Everyone's watching him dance now, and he wasn't even on the list. So it's funny how things can change. But yeah, I saw this series being more competitive than people thought it would be, because the way that Atlanta finished the season, They finished the season very strong. And then also, inexperience can work two ways. Sometimes it can overwhelm you and you can drown, but then sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know the pressure that you're in. And sometimes you could just play, and that's what Atlanta is at the moment. Like they're just out there just hooping, and Jalen Johnson hasn't even come to the party yet. So if he's able to wake up out of his coma, this could definitely go seven. And for New York, I think this is good for them because sometimes you need to be battle tested. Another team we're going to talk about next, who they could potentially match up with, they're going to need to bring everything in order to knock down the Boston Celtics. So this is a great series for New York to be able to win in different ways, to be able to endure some adversity. Ultimately, I think they do get out of this series. But yeah, this is great for the Knicks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a little bit worried about the Knicks. I said it in the last pod, even while acknowledging that I still thought they would win in six. I've had question marks about them all season. I thought it was going to take a really elite team to sort of, bring those question marks out of them. I probably underestimated Atlanta a little bit just in terms of how much they bring those question marks out. Like the Knicks have just not been able to get anything really consistent out of Mikal Bridges, to the point where in the game the other night he literally only plays 19 minutes, doesn't close the game. You've got guys that they're bringing in from the bench like Miles McBride and Jordan Clarkson closing games instead, but really they've not been able to actually get very much of a tune out of their bench offensively at all, and that's where I think they have just been a little bit exposed in this series, and that was kind of not what I was expecting to be exposed for them. Was like, I didn't think it was going to be like a lack of depth or anything. I thought it was actually going to be like guys like Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson, maybe sort of, almost little really nitpicking things that elite teams can do to, draw those guys out of their comfort zones. And they, the Hawks have been able to do that a little bit with Jalen Brunson, albeit Jalen Brunson is still going to do what he does because he's still going to get 2 feet in the paint and still going to try and excel that way. He's going to get a lot of shots up, so he's probably going to win the maths game over the course of the series. But Nikhil Alexander-Walker and Dyson Daniels especially, shout out to them, because when either of them have been switched on to Jalen Brunson, they've caused him real problems. But for me, where this series has been, won and lost so far at the 2-2 point that it currently is that Atlanta have basically been able to get more out of their bench, out of guys like Gabe Vincent and Jonathan Kuminga, even Corey Kispert coming in for a little bit of minutes here and there, than the Knicks have out of theirs. And if I'm Boston in that second round, I'm absolutely licking my lips at this matchup that's coming next, whichever side it comes from, because I just think Boston has got all the things we've talked about throughout this podcast so far in terms of like what you need to be ready for the playoffs in abundance. And the Atlanta Hawks, if they get through, like that is absolutely like amazing for them if they can manage to do that. I still expect that New York will, and then I expect New York to be really exposed by Boston in this second round.
I think what this series is teaching the New York Knicks is that if you're going to have playoff success, Carl Anthony Towns has to be your best player, because you talked about those roles players that aren't playing well. Well, look at it in regards to Brunson. They don't have to double him because there's length that's sitting on top of him, right? Which means the defense can stay at home with Miles Bridges and OG Anunoby, right? Whereas if you start playing through Cat, they got to send doubles. And Cat is a great passer, and then he can spray it out to shooters and give those guys an open look. So I think, if anything, is continuing to set the recipe what's going to be success for New York, because in Boston, again, they're going to need Carl Anthony Towns to be the best player. So, yeah, this is why the playoffs are so intriguing. It's cat and mouse, it's chess, and the chess pieces continue to move.
Yeah, well, if the cat in this situation is KAT, then CJ McCollum has certainly not shown himself to be a mouse so far. I'm so excited to see where these next 3 games go. But as I said before, the team that I think are waiting in the wings, we started with an open and shut case of a playoff series, so we're going to finish with what I'm predicting to be a little bit of an open and shut case now of a playoff series. Philly got Embiid back, but I feel like they won their one game in Boston. That was the big surprise for me. I had this down as a Boston sweep, to be honest, even if Philly were able to get Embiid back, and I didn't think they would, to be honest. But he gets back on the floor, he has 26 points, he looks good, but Boston still manages to get this done, Drew. And yeah, I just think this one is over. Philly have got some, roster questions to answer in the off season, but I think they'll like what they've seen from guys like Maxi and especially VJ Edgecombe. By the way, VJ Edgecombe looks so legit and has done over the course of this playoff series, even so far against a great Boston Celtics team. But yeah, I think Philly's race is run at this stage.
Yeah, gentlemen sweep on the way tonight. You know, Boston hosts Philadelphia, and yeah, they got their one win. If anything, Embiid, he hurts Philly more than he helps them, just because they're not used to playing with them. You know, it when you got a superstar like that, everyone has to change the way they play, and it's tough to change the way you play in the middle of a fight. Right? It's different from the regular season, but in the playoffs, it's very difficult to adjust and find your role and adjust your role on the fly. And you know, all this does for Philadelphia, as you mentioned, which is a great point, is this makes their offseason very, very interesting. You have to find a way to get off Embiid. I don't know who if there's going to be any takers out there, because why would you take on that massive contract with a guy that's never going to be available? So you would have to probably give up some assets to get off of him, because you cannot go into next season with Paul George and Embiid on both of those massive contracts. You got to get off one. And right now, it's probably Embiid more than Paul George, because Paul George still, uh, he's proven he can play a role. Like, he could be the third or fourth best player on your team because he can shoot. With Embiid, it's very difficult to see Embiid being your third best player. And so maybe he goes off to one of these younger teams. Maybe he goes to a team like Portland. Portland could probably use him. But yeah, Philadelphia goes into the offseason, or is going to go into the offseason with a lot of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And another team that I think is interesting in the Giannis sweepstakes. There's not a ton of teams that I think Giannis makes like tactical sense for, because there's obviously a spacing question always with Giannis, but I think you just find a way with a guy who is that good, and maybe Philly are another one of those teams that might just find themselves in those sweepstakes. I personally think they should get a little bit younger than that, to be honest, but we will see. Paul George, a very expensive role player in the role that you've put him in there, Drew. I think Paul George would do well to stay in Philly this off season, but hey, we'll see what happens there. The Boston Celtics, though, that 1-2 punch looking ominous for whoever makes out of that Knicks Hawks series. The thing that I think has been so good about Boston, particularly in these playoffs, and why I think they've like arrived at the moment at the perfect time, from where we probably underestimated them a little bit too much at the start of the season because of how elite head coach Joe Mazzulla is, because of how elite Jaylen Brown is, but actually because of how elite everything else really is around them. Like it feels like you're always going to get Tatum and Brown giving you like at least 20 to 25 points a night, and it's usually 25 and has been 25 throughout most of this playoff series. But it feels like, even if Peyton Pritchard isn't necessarily dropping 30 like he did last night, you're going to get the scoring shared around the team. There's going to be a Derek White game. There's going to be, a Nemez Keita game. Even Nikola Vucevic coming off the bench is going to be able to do something. Again, just comes back to me to length, to depth. This Boston team's got it all in abundance, and like without making too big sort of sweeping predictions, I mentioned about the two series that are open and shut. If you'd have said to me that the Boston Celtics and the OKC Thunder are going to be the two teams that make it to the finals out of when all is said and done, I think that's going to be some playoff series. And actually, there's an argument that if OKC cruise through the West to an extent, and Boston, sort of come at that moment, Boston might just catch that OKC team unawares, because I think this Boston team is genuinely really, really right up there in terms of the favorites.
Yeah, when you look at all the teams in the East, Boston is more equipped to handle OKC and make it a more entertaining series. I think right now that what we're seeing from the Knicks, they can't handle OKC. Definitely Detroit is not even going to be close. They will just gobble up and swarm their offense. So Boston just needs to continue to do what they do and keep building that momentum. Got a tough series coming up ahead with New York if they're able to get through. But man, next week this time we will be in round two. So looking forward to it, man. It's getting juicy.
It is absolutely getting juicy. I'm already excited for another weekend of playoff basketball, and whatever is to come over these next 3 or 4 games for a lot of these teams is definitely going to be exciting. But all that is left for me to do for this episode, another great one, chopping up with Drew, looking through these playoff matchups. I'm so glad this real basketball is here. But Drew, kindly lead us out, sir.
Absolutely. Round one. coming to the end, but we will be back to prepare you, to load you up for another week and a half of basketball in round two. The playoffs is great. You got 2.5 months of high quality basketball with Jeopardy in the end, and guys giving it their all, and every possession matters. And we will be here for every possession here on the pond. And we will see you guys next time.